This is New York, but not the New York you know. No skyscrapers, no cars, no modern streets. This is a city frozen in time, before everything changed. A place where the tallest structures barely reached 5 stories, and the entire population could fit into a single modern neighborhood. What you're about to see will completely shift how you think about America's most famous city. Because the New York that once existed is almost unrecognizable today. Before it became a global city, New York was a small, crowded place built around the harbor. We're talking about the early 1800s, when the entire city occupied just the southern tip of Manhattan. The population was roughly 60,000 people, packed into an area smaller than today's financial district. There were no boroughs. Brooklyn was a separate village. Queens didn't exist as we know it. Everything that mattered happened in this tiny pocket of land.
The streets had names like Pearl, Water, and Stone, reminders that the city was literally built on top of the shoreline. Buildings pushed right up against each other, creating a maze of narrow passages and alleys. This wasn't the city of opportunity yet. It was barely holding on. But something was stirring beneath the surface, something that would soon explode. And to understand what happened next, you need to see how people actually lived here. Buildings were low, streets were narrow. From above, the city looked almost flat. Nothing blocked the sky. Nothing stretched upward. New York wasn't built to impress. It was built to survive. Most structures were made of wood and brick, 2 or 3 stories at most. The wealthy merchants had slightly taller homes along Broadway, but even those were modest compared to European standards. There were no grand plazas or sweeping boulevards. Space was precious, and every inch was used. Rooftops were cluttered with chimneys belching smoke from coal-burning stoves. Laundry hung between buildings, creating canopies of cloth that blocked sunlight from the streets below. The entire skyline could be taken in with a single glance. Church steeples were the only things that broke the monotony, reaching just high enough to be seen from the harbor. From a distance, New York looked almost peaceful, but up close, it was chaos. And the real chaos was happening down at the water. The heart of the city was the water. Ships arrived daily, carrying food, supplies, and people from far away. Before highways and trains, the harbor was New York's main connection to the world. The docks stretched along the East River and the Hudson, crowded with sailing vessels from Europe, the Caribbean, and ports along the American coast. Sailors shouted in a dozen different languages. Cargo was hauled by hand, barrels of rum, crates of fabric, sacks of grain. The smell was overpowering. Salt water, tar, rotting fish, and sweat. Merchants negotiated deals right there on the piers, shaking hands over shipments worth fortunes. Taverns lined the waterfront, filled with captains, dock workers, and traders looking for their next opportunity. Fortunes were made and lost within sight of the water. This was where New York's economy lived and breathed. Without the harbor, the city had nothing. No industry, no trade, no reason to exist. And the people who kept it running, they lived shoulder to shoulder in the streets just beyond the docks. Most people lived close together. Homes, shops, and workplaces were often in the same building. Streets were always busy. Vendors, workers, children. Life happened outdoors. There was no such thing as privacy. Families of 6 or more crammed into single rooms. Kitchens doubled as bedrooms. The line between public and private space barely existed. Every morning, street vendors set up carts selling bread, oysters, milk, vegetables. Shopkeepers opened their doors directly onto the sidewalk, displaying goods where people walked. Blacksmiths hammered metal in open-air workshops. Tailors stitched clothes in front windows. The noise was constant. Hooves on cobblestone, wagon wheels creaking, voices haggling and arguing and laughing.
Children played in the streets because there was nowhere else to go. Women carried water from public pumps, balancing buckets on their hips. Men gathered in doorways and alleys, talking politics and business. Everyone knew everyone. Your reputation mattered because word spread fast. But living this close came with serious consequences. The city was crowded. Clean water was limited. Disease was common. Fires were a constant danger. One spark could destroy entire blocks. Living here wasn't easy, but people stayed. Cholera outbreaks swept through neighborhoods every few years, killing hundreds. Yellow fever was a summer terror. Those who could afford it fled to the countryside. The rest prayed and hoped. Garbage piled up in the streets because there was no organized sanitation. Pigs roamed freely, eating trash and leaving waste everywhere. They were considered the city's cleanup crew. Water came from wells and pumps, often contaminated by nearby cesspools and privies. Fire was the most terrifying threat. Most buildings were wood. Once flames started, they spread fast. Volunteer fire companies raced to respond, but entire neighborhoods could be ash by morning. Insurance was expensive. Losing your home meant losing everything. Despite all this, people didn't leave. They couldn't. New York was still the best chance most had at building something. And in the middle of all this chaos, there were places that stood for something different. Churches stood tall compared to everything else. They weren't just places of worship. They were landmarks, meeting points, signs of order in a growing city. Trinity Church, with its soaring steeple, could be seen from almost anywhere downtown. It was a symbol of stability in a world that felt unstable. Churches marked time. Bells rang every hour, calling people to prayer or signaling the start of the workday. Sundays brought the entire community together, regardless of wealth or status. Inside, the wealthy sat in pews near the front. The poor stood in the back, but everyone was there. Churches also ran charity efforts, feeding the hungry and sheltering orphans. They provided education when public schools barely existed. In a city obsessed with money and survival, churches reminded people there was supposed to be something higher. They were also political centers. Ministers had influence, and their opinions shaped public debates. But even as churches held their ground, the city around them was beginning to shift. Slowly, New York began to change. Streets expanded. Buildings grew taller. The city started reaching upward. What was once a small harbor town was preparing to become something bigger, a city that would reshape the world. By the 1820s and 30s, new construction techniques arrived. Brick replaced wood in wealthier areas. Buildings climbed to 4, then 5, then 6 stories. The grid plan was introduced, organizing the chaos into numbered streets and avenues stretching north. Canals and railroads connected New York to the interior of the country, making it the gateway to America's growing West. Immigrants poured in, Irish, German, Italian, each wave adding density and energy. The population doubled, then doubled again. Factories opened, banks expanded. The stock exchange began to hum with activity. What had been a scrappy port town was becoming the economic engine of a nation. Wealth concentrated. Mansions appeared uptown. The gap between rich and poor widened. But the transformation was undeniable. New York was no longer just surviving. It was beginning to dominate. Walking through New York today, it's hard to imagine this version ever existed. But beneath the modern city, the past is still there, waiting to be remembered. If you dig beneath the pavement, you'll find remnants, old foundations, forgotten streets, colonial-era walls. The narrow alleys of the financial district still follow paths laid out centuries ago. Stone Street, Water Street, Pearl Street. They're not just names, they're echoes. The harbor that built the city still surrounds it, though now it's dominated by ferries and tourists instead of tall ships and traders. The spirit of that crowded, chaotic, relentless place never really left. It just evolved. Every modern skyscraper stands on the shoulders of those low wooden buildings. Every subway tunnel cuts through layers of history. New York didn't erase its past, it built on top of it. and that makes it even more powerful. This channel explores cities before the modern world. Subscribe to see more forgotten places brought back to life. Next time, we'll step into London before the Underground, or Paris before the Eiffel Tower. Cities that shaped history but looked nothing like they do now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. And drop a comment. What lost city do you want to see next? Let's bring the past back together.